Hey guys, what's up? It's Debbie, and I am back with more True Crimes of Criminal Minds. We're not talking about an episode this week. We're doing part 2 of Jack the Ripper. If you've never been to my channel before, what I do is I look at a Criminal Minds episode, and then I talk about a real case that was either mentioned in the episode was inspired by the case, or it's similar to the case on the show. Welcome back, returning viewers. I love you guys. Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about the Jack the Ripper suspects. Last week I talked about the actual crimes that he did. So if you don't know about Jack the Ripper and you want to find out who he was and what he did, well, we don't know who he was, but you know what I mean. Go ahead and watch the first video. I will put a link in the description to it, so you guys can watch that before this one if you would like. You could watch them in reverse order if you wanted to. It would still make sense. I'm going to do these from most likely to most ridiculous. Some people have more time and money on their hands than they should. Just saying. People to this day are still doing things like testing the letters and testing supposed clothing of the victims, spending millions of their own money to try to determine who Jack the Ripper is. If I was rich, I don't think I would care that much. I would not use millions of dollars to find out who this madman was. It's my money. This is the one that experts believe he is the most plausible person to have been Jack the Ripper. Okay, we're going to start with James Maybrick. Experts believe, I have trouble with that word because I try to say excerpts, which is not the same word. Experts believe that he was the most plausible person to have been Jack the Ripper. There are several pieces of evidence that was obtained after his death that point to that. I think he was kind of a suspect at the time, but these pieces of evidence that came up after his death are very, very compelling. He was born in Liverpool in 1838, and he entered the cotton trade as a young man. He briefly worked in London at a shipbroking office. And because a shipbroker, they're like the middleman between the shipper and the ship that they're being shipped. I'm saying ship too much. He's a middleman in shipping. So he traveled back and forth between the U.S. and England. And he actually moved to the U.S. to Virginia in 1871. And he contracted malaria in 1874. Now, if you don't know what malaria is, it's a disease that's caused by a mosquito bite. And it can come and go over a person's lifetime. It can be fatal, but they have medicine for it now, just antibiotics, and it will make the symptoms go away, but the disease is still there, and it could come up 10, 20 years later or never come back at all. So it's kind of like a crapshoot. But back then, they used a medicine that has arsenic in it. It, according to Wikipedia, it's an antibiotic. It's like a natural antibiotic called arsenithricin, AST for short, and it is the only known natural arsenic-containing antibiotic. And it inhibits the proliferation of malaria-causing parasites in human cells. Now, he got addicted to this medicine, and I don't understand because antibiotics aren't usually addicting. I don't understand how you get addicted to an antibiotic, but anyway, he did. So he moved back to Liverpool, and he married a woman named Florence Chandler. They had 2 children, but the marriage was not a happy one, and they both cheated on each other. It doesn't say who did first or anything like that, just that there was mutual infidelity in the marriage. He died of arsenic poisoning in April of 1889. His wife was put on trial for his murder and sentenced to life. However, it was overturned and she was released in 1904. So she was in prison for 15 years for a crime that she did not commit, and he died of arsenic poisoning because he was still taking that antibiotic that had arsenic in it. So over 100 years after his death, 2 pieces of damning evidence have come to light. The first being a diary that was written by him. They've checked the handwriting. It is his handwriting. And it outlines the Jack the Ripper murders. And there's a lot of things in it that were common knowledge, but there were also things in it that only the killer would know. And this is creepy. Very creepy. But if you're a Jack the Ripper groupie, maybe you would do this, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're Jack the Ripper, but he had a pocket watch, and engraved on the back it said, "I am Jack, J. Maybrick," and it also had the initials of the canonical 5 victims etched in it. He was familiar with Whitechapel and had the means to flee if he needed to. And there's a crime scene photo. There's not a lot of actual photos from back then because photography wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. But there is a crime scene photo of one of the victims, and on the wall behind her, the initials are FM. And experts think that FM stands for Florence Maybrick, which was his wife, and that he was getting revenge on her for her adultery. But he had mistresses. So, pot, meet, kettle. I mean, geez. Aaron Kaminsky. This is another plausible one. He was a Polish Jew who immigrated with his family at the age of 15, first moving to Germany, then to London. He worked as a barber. I don't know much about this, but I think I'm going to go down a rabbit hole because barbers were also surgeons back then. They could do dental work. They could do surgeries. They could do amputations. I don't even know what kind of school they had that made you a barber and a surgeon, but I'm going to Google that later. In July of 1890, he was admitted to a workhouse but was released 3 days later. And I don't know why he was admitted to a workhouse. I always thought that workhouses were for, like, lower security prisoners. But I read that in February of 1891, he was admitted to a workhouse again for threatening women with a knife. So I don't know why he was sent to a workhouse. But he was then sent to an asylum. He was said to have homicidal tendencies, but in reality, he was probably schizophrenic. He heard voices, and he was paranoid about taking food or drink that he did not prepare himself. Due to that, he became emaciated every time he was incarcerated. He didn't physically fit the profile of Jack the Ripper. He was 23, his English was poor, and he was very small due to his poor eating habits. He refused to wash himself, and he died of gangrene in February 1919. It is an infection that you get when a wound is just left to fester. It's literally rot. You're rotting. And the infection gets in your bloodstream, and it is fatal if it's not treated. And it also stinks to high heaven. In my nursing career, I took care of one patient that had it, and this man would not let us do what needed to be done, basically. It was really disgusting. Now, there was a shawl that was supposedly owned by Catherine Eddowes. And some of the DNA that was found on it matched Aaron Kaminsky's mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA, if I understand correctly, if you guys want to fact check me on that, go ahead and then let me know in the comments. But what I understand to be mitochondrial DNA is DNA that comes from your mother, and it is only able to connect relationships, familial relationships. Like my brother and I would have the same mitochondrial DNA, but our actual DNA is different. So actual DNA is more exclusive. Like you can say, you know, there's a 95% chance, 98% chance, whatever, that this person is this person. You know what I mean? Like, I know I didn't state that coherently, but I hope you get the gist. So, and the shawl wasn't even at the crime scene, and it was potentially contaminated. So, any DNA they did get off of it, we don't know how it got there in the first place. Okay, so the next one, I love his last name. It's just cute. He's not cute. He's a horror. Francis Tumblety. Dr. Francis Tumblety, but he wasn't really a doctor. He was born in 1833, either in Ireland or Canada. Not that much is known about his childhood, other than he moved with his family to New York. He worked at a drugstore and was apprenticed to a doctor, and started calling himself a doctor. But he kind of lived a double life, because in his spare time, he sold dirty books in a seedy part of town. In the 1850s and 60s, he moved around the US and Canada posing as a doctor. He claimed to have knowledge of mystical cures and medication from India. In other words, he was a fraud, or as some would say, a snake oil salesman. He was arrested in Canada twice, and I don't know the outcome. Well, I kind of do. He was arrested twice, one for providing illegal abortions. And I don't know what came of that case. But the next one was for a sudden suspicious death of a patient. So I guess they arrested him and he made bail, and then he just disappeared. So in 1865, he was living in Missouri under a fake name, and that name was Dr. Blackburn. Now, this failed terribly because the real Dr. Blackburn was wanted for questioning in the death of Abraham Lincoln. So, Tumblety got arrested because the police thought he was the real Dr. Blackburn that had something to do with the assassination of President Lincoln. It's just too delicious. I love it. He moved to London in the summer of 1888, still posing as a doctor. The police started investigating him in August 1888. There are rumors that an American doctor approached the London Pathology Museum asking to buy uteruses. Why? Why do you want uteruses? Anyway, it was just a rumor. I don't know if it really happened or not, but it's weird. On November 7th, 1888, he was arrested in London for unnatural offenses, which back then could be a lot of things. He could have been a rapist, or he could have been gay, but at any rate, he was released on bail on November 7th, And Mary Jane Kelly was killed on November the 9th. So he was rearrested on November 12th. And they released him on bail again on November 16th. And then he just disappeared like a puff of smoke. He fit the criminal profile, had medical knowledge, disliked women, and was self-obsessed and odd. They lock up everybody nowadays. Everybody's odd. Oh, it's self-obsessed and odd. Okay. The next one. We're going slowly, less plausible. Joseph Barnett. He was Mary Jane Kelly's boyfriend. I talked a little bit about him in the first episode. He was born on May 25th, 1853 in Whitechapel to Irish immigrant parents. He was a fish porter. Now, I didn't know what a fish porter was, so I looked it up. They had to be licensed, and all they did was they fetched and carried fish, and they had to be licensed to do that. Oh my gosh. But they did not gut fish. Somebody else gutted the fish. They just took it from the ships to the store or whatever. I don't know. So he met Mary Kelly on April 8th, 1887 in a pub where they drank together and promised to meet up the next day. So it's kind of like a love at first sight thing. And they lived together after that. But it's thought that he probably paid for at least the first night that they were together. There were multiple evictions due to non-payment of rent and drunkenness, and they moved frequently. Now, this was the only victim of Jack the Ripper that actually had a steady residence. Even moving, she still had a residence, where the other women, they lived in the doss houses. In 1998, John Douglas, FBI profiler, who we all know and love if you are a true crime fan, John Douglas Rossi was patterned after John Douglas on Criminal Minds. In 1988, he made a criminal profile of Jack the Ripper, and he said that Jack the Ripper was a white male, aged 26 to 38. That's awfully specific. A local to the Whitechapel area, had an absent father, a physical defect, and a job that provided an outlet for his violent tendencies. So Barnett partially fit this profile. He was 30 years old. His dad died when he was 6 years old, and he had echolalia. Echolalia is repeating words spoken to you, and it's a symptom of Tourette syndrome. My husband has Tourette's, and when we were dating, he would do it. Like I would say, I don't know. One time I said something about, I don't remember the first part of the sentence, but the last part was in books and movies. And he said, books and movies? And I was like, what? It kind of freaked me out a little bit. But the more we dated and the more comfortable he got around me, the less he did it. So, and Tourette's is a whole nother subject that I could go way deep into because it's not what everybody thinks it is. And you guys, if you ever see TikToks or YouTube videos of girls doing like this kind of stuff, that's not Tourette's. They're faking it. That is not how Tourette's works. So, echolalia is not so much a physical defect as a brain defect, but people would have thought that he was strange because of that. And the job being an outlet for violent tendencies didn't make sense because a fish porter didn't gut fish. But I think the thinking was that they did, and so because he could take a knife to a fish, that was an outlet for his violent tendencies. But he didn't gut fish. So that part of the profile doesn't fit. And he fit the physical description too. He was 5'8" with fair hair and a mustache. John Douglas also said there were two possible reasons that the Jack the Ripper murder stopped. And this confuses me because I've seen a lot of real FBI stuff and fake FBI stuff. And one of the reasons why John Douglas thought he stopped was because he was afraid of getting caught. And from what I heard on TV, I've never been in the FBI, so I don't know, but they don't just quit because they're afraid they're going to get caught. They will just keep going and going and going. It's like a compulsion. They can't stop. They're not like, oh man, I better stop now. I'm going to get caught. They can't help it. They just, and of course, the main two reasons that you usually hear about is that he either got arrested or he was dead. I don't buy that he was afraid of getting caught thing, though. I don't. Barnett was questioned. Okay, this is ambiguous, so I'm not exactly sure what it means. He was questioned 2 to 4 hours after Mary Kelly's death. I don't know if that means time-wise, like 2 hours after her death or 4 hours after her death, or if it means he was actually questioned for 2 or 4 hours. So it was very ambiguous the way it was written, so I'm not quite sure which it means. But he was questioned by the police after her death. This one surprised me almost as much as Lewis Carroll did. This guy's name was Francis Craig. And if you remember from last week, I said that we didn't know much about Mary Kelly. Everything we knew basically were things that her friend or Joseph Barnett told the police after her death. But apparently, she married Francis Craig, who was the client that took her to France. If you didn't see the first episode, Mary Kelly was the last victim, and she worked in a brothel at first. And Francis Craig was one of her clients that had a very strong liking for her, and he took her to France, and she hated it and moved back to England. Now, I didn't read anywhere that he came back with her, but apparently they were married. Dr. Wynne Weston Davies wrote a book about Mary Jane Kelly in 2015, claiming to be her great nephew. And last week, I think I said she was married to a man named Davis, but it actually said Davis or Davies. So if this dude is really her great nephew, then she married a guy named Davies. That's the one that was killed in the explosion. So Francis Craig was born in Acton, London in 1837. He was a Victorian newspaper reporter, and he covered all of the Jack the Ripper murders. So he would have knowledge of everything that was being done, or at least everything that the cops were releasing. He married Mary Jane Kelly in Hammersmith on December 24th, 1884. Then, when he found out that she was still doing sex work, he divorced her in 1886. Which, dude, that's how you met her. Some people believe that he killed the other women as a cover so that he could kill Mary for revenge. I don't know. If I had, not that I would ever kill anybody, but if I had a target in mind, I would kill that target. I wouldn't think about killing innocent people to cover it up. That just makes it worse. Okay, this guy seems really plausible to me as well. Karl Feigenbaum, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. He was a 54-year-old German merchant sailor. He was a psychopath who confessed to mutilating women. After his death, his lawyer even said that he was Jack the Ripper. He worked on ships close to Whitechapel under the alias Anton Zahn. Records prove that he was in Whitechapel on every single day that there was a murder. And he and his co-workers were also seen visiting brothels. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1890, where he was convicted of killing his landlady by, guess what? Cutting her throat and stabbing her. He was sent to Sing Sing prison in New York and was executed by electric chair. Now we're going to get to a few of the less likely ones. Y'all, I did not do every suspect. There's a dang long list of suspects. So much. But I did the most plausible. And now I'm going to do the ones that other people think, but it's more probable that they're not than they are. Prince Albert Victor. I used to believe this theory, but now that I've done research on this, I realize that there's no way. He was the grandson of Queen Victoria, making him second in line to the throne. And it was said that he was a disappointment to the royal family. This theory comes from a book written in 1962 by Philippe Julian. And there were rumors that he was a homosexual and that he was mentally ill. And all of this was based on findings of his doctor, William Gull. He got syphilis in the West Indies, which is a sexually transmitted disease, and it actually erodes the brain and it causes insanity. And they think that's why he became Jack the Ripper, because he just went insane from the syphilis. Nowadays, syphilis can be cured easily with antibiotics, but back then it was pretty much you went crazy and you died. It's also rumored that the royal family knew that he was Jack the Ripper, but did nothing to restrain him until after the double event. The double event was the night that he killed Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes. He was confined to an asylum, but he wasn't even in London at the time of the murders. This next theory, this is the one I believed, and I believed it because I saw it on a movie. From Hell. One of the letters started off from Hell, if you recall. And it is one of my favorite movies, and Johnny Depp is in it. He plays Inspector Abberline. And this was so convincing to me, but I had just never researched Jack the Ripper. So I just believed everything, this whole theory. I thought, oh, it's so plausible, it makes so much sense. The theory was that the prince got one of the sex workers pregnant and he killed her along with anybody else that knew about it. But he was probably a homosexual and he was not right in the head. Who knows? I don't think he did it. Oh, he wasn't in London at the time. He couldn't have done it. The next one is Montague John Druitt. He was born on August 15th, 1857. He came from a privileged family going to Winchester College. He was good at sports and received a scholarship to New College, Oxford. He was a barrister, which I think is just a lawyer. Are there any people from the UK? Could you tell me in the comments, is barrister just a lawyer or is it some other type of law person? So he was a barrister, but he also worked as an assistant schoolmaster at a London boarding school to supplement his income. And it's not clear if he wasn't making enough as a barrister or if he was just wanting more money. He was dismissed from the boarding school on November 30th, 1888. And we don't know for sure why, because the newspapers just said that he got in serious trouble. Oh my gosh, today everybody would know everything he did down to the color of his socks. Anyway, serious trouble. He went missing on December 31st, 1888, and he was found floating in the Thames River with stones in his pocket. There is a theory that he was fired for being gay. There's also a theory that he was being blackmailed because he was found with a large amount of cash on his body. Like, too much cash to be walking around with. Which, those could be the same theory, actually. Like, he could be gay and someone knew it and was blackmailing him that you're going to tell the school. Who knows? 100 years ago. A third theory is that he unalived himself because of a hereditary mental illness. This is backed up by an unalived note addressed to his brother that was found in his home. It said, "Since Friday, I felt that I was going to be like Mother, and the best thing for me was to die." His mother and his sister both unalived themselves. And the only thing that led to the theory that he was Jack the Ripper was that he lived close to where the murders happened. Doesn't that suck? I mean, oh my gosh. Okay, this suspect I knew about because I used to be, I still am, I guess. I haven't read any of her books in years, but I used to be a huge Patricia Cornwell fan. She wrote the Kay Scarpetta novels. They're crime novels about a medical examiner. And they're very, very good. So she got rich writing these books, and she used millions of her own money to try to figure out who Jack the Ripper was. Now, if you want to read it, she wrote a book. I read it years ago because I was a fan of hers. It is boring. So boring. I do not recommend it, but if you want to read it, it's called Portrait of a Killer, Jack the Ripper Case Closed. And it convinced me of absolutely nothing. Now, he was considered a suspect at the time. I do not know why, but he was. DNA evidence links him to one of the Jack the Ripper letters. He owned the same stationery that was written on. And I guess that's significant because back then things weren't mass manufactured like they are now. So it was easier to tell that there wasn't as much of that stationery around, that it couldn't just be a coincidence that they used the same stationery. I think that was the thinking behind that. He was born in Munich in 1860 and he immigrated to England in 1869. Experts say that he put clues in his paintings. One of his paintings shows a naked woman in bed and there's a man sitting on the edge of the bed. And it says it's depicting her fighting off his advances, but it doesn't look that way to me. She's just laying there and he's sitting on the bed. And I swear it could be a before picture of the picture of Mary Kelly when she was killed. Now, I talked about how gruesome and how much overkill her death was last week. And I did find a picture of it, an actual photograph, but I chose not to show it because it is horrendous. And likewise, I'm not going to show you the painting. However, it's very easy to find. All you have to do is Google it if you want to see it. But that was only one of the paintings. They thought that all of his paintings had clues about the murders in them. He was born with a condition called hypospadias and had several operations on his penis, which left him impotent. Now, hypospadias, it's a strange disorder. I used to be a pediatric nurse, and I also have a friend whose son had this. What it is, the urethra, instead of coming out at the end of the penis, it comes out underneath the penis. So, left alone, it can cause infections, infertility. There's lots of reasons why you want to do the surgery to correct it. And unfortunately, it sometimes leaves men impotent, especially if they have to have more than one surgery on it. Experts believe that Jack the Ripper was impotent and the stabbing was a substitute for sex. And there is a name for that. It is a paraphilia and it is called piquerism. So, Miss Patricia Cornwell did find mitochondrial DNA matching Sickert on one of the Jack the Ripper letters. But like I said earlier, mitochondrial DNA only shows a familial connection, does not exclude one person. It's too broad to narrow down the actual person. And Some of the letters are believed to be a hoax. So any of the DNA on these letters could be from the hoaxer that sent it and not Jack the Ripper. He died in 1942, and experts are not convinced that he was Jack the Ripper, and I'm not either. Now, my favorite and most ridiculous Lewis Carroll. This theory is so stupid, it's funny. And I'm going to use some language because I'm going to do some quoting here. So, please forgive me. I hope you too, please forgive me. Okay. There's a book. It was published in 1996. Written by a man named Richard Wallace. It was called Jack the Ripper, Light-Hearted Friend. And it's all about Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, being Jack the Ripper. Because he says Lewis Carroll liked anagrams. So if you rearrange the letters in his literary works, you get stuff about Jack the Ripper. He first published in 1889, so that was right after the murders. Richard Wallace posits that Carroll, along with his colleague Thomas Vera Bain, worked together as Jack the Ripper. And I do not think anybody ever thought that Jack the Ripper had a partner. So I'll tell you about the anagrams in a minute, but now I'm going to tell you why they were not Jack the Ripper. Lewis Carroll wasn't even in the East End of London in 1888, and his colleague Bain, he had a bad back in 1888 and was not physically able to do anything like this. But the reason why Carroll's believed to be Jack the Ripper is because this guy thinks he put anagrams in his written works. Carroll was a fan of anagrams, so Wallace rearranged text from his letters and published works to find hidden Ripper-related messages. One was in the book The Nursery Alice. Okay, here's the passage from the book. Now, I did not sit down and try to do these anagrams myself, but I've found these on several different websites. If you guys want to waste time doing that, go ahead. And if you do, let me know in the comments if you can do it. This is the passage from the book, The Nursery Alice. So we went to the cook and we got her to make a saucer full of nice oatmeal porridge. And then we called Dash into the house and we said, "Now, Dash, you're going to have your birthday treat." We expected Dash would jump for joy, but it didn't one bit. This is what Wallace turned it into. "Oh, we, Thomas Bain, Charles Dodgson." Charles Dodgson was Lewis Carroll's full name, by the way. "Oh, we, Thomas Bain, Charles Dodgson, coited into the slain nude body, expected to taste, devour, enjoy a nice meal of a dead whore's uterus. We made do, found it awful wan and tough, like a worn, dirty goat hog. We both threw it out. Jack the Ripper." So after Wallace published a brief explanation of his research in Harper's Magazine, two readers wrote in. They had taken Wallace's opening paragraph and changed it to make Wallace be confessing to O.J. Simpson's ex-wife murder. So this is the opening paragraph of his book. "This is my story of Jack the Ripper, the man behind Britain's worst unsolved murders. It is a story that points to the unlikeliest of suspects, a man who wrote children's stories. That man is Charles Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll, author of such beloved books as Alice in Wonderland." So the readers switched the letters around to make the confession about, I forgot her name, O.J. Simpson's ex-wife and her friend. The truth is this. I, Richard Wallace, stabbed and killed a muted Nicole Brown in cold blood, severing her throat with my trusty shiv strokes. I set up Orenthal James Simpson, who was utterly innocent of this murder. P.S. I also wrote Shakespeare's sonnets and a lot of Francis Bacon's works, too. Wallace did not reply. It's just too funny. Oh my God. Okay. That's not all of them, but that's enough. So I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And remember, be kind to people, love your family, and Jesus loves you. Bye. I'll see you all in the next one.